They came without warning. An alien fleet vast as the night sky, reducing our colony to fire and silence. To them, it was nothing. A single strike. A forgotten victory. They thought we were finished. But humanity has never been about ships or numbers. We rise from ruins, we turn grief into fire, and even wreckage into weapons. In the ashes of the silent fleet, survivors stir, plotting a war the aliens never imagined. What happens when the hunted become the hunters? When fragile humans become the galaxy's greatest threat? The cinder sky, the colony, died in silence. Not the silence of peace, nor the silence of sleep, but the silence that comes when the air itself is torn apart. When screams are smothered by the roar of collapsing stone and the shriek of metal surrendering to fire. In the final moments, the stars above the outpost of Uriel burned cold, distant, indifferent to the storm of light that swept across the planet's surface. The alien fleet had descended with the precision of a blade. 1,000 ships, sleek and faceless, blotting out the sky. Their weapons fell like rain. White-hot lances that split oceans, cracked mountains, and scoured cities from their roots. The colonists had barely raised their alarms before everything they had built, everything they had dreamed, was turned to ash. The invaders didn't stay to watch. That perhaps was their first mistake. They believed it was done. To the Cathari Armada, Earth's distant colony was no more than an insect nest crushed underfoot, not worth the weight of memory. They had silenced human voices on this world, and with them they believed human defiance. But fire does not always consume. Sometimes it forges. The survivors crawled from the wreckage days later. Their faces were blackened with soot, their hands raw from clawing through debris, their lungs thick with smoke. There were few of them compared to the tens of thousands who had once lived here, but their eyes held a fire the aliens had never measured. Commander Elias Rourke had been buried beneath 3 levels of shattered alloy and stone when the first strikes landed. He should have died. His chest had stopped rising, his pulse had flickered to a thread, but somehow breath returned. He would later tell no one why, only that when he opened his eyes he saw a shard of sky through the rubble, and he whispered, "Not luck. Someone wanted me alive." Others had their own interpretations. Some said it was chance, others that it was fate. But whatever force spared them, it gave them one truth. They were not finished. By the 3rd night they gathered among the ruins of what had once been the colony's central plaza. The marble was cracked and scorched. The once proud monument to human settlement shattered into pieces scattered across the dust. A few scavenged lamps cast weak light, flickering in the smoke-choked air. There were only 79 of them. Engineers, miners, farmers, soldiers, and children. Broken, bruised, starving, but they had one another. "We cannot rebuild," one of the miners whispered hoarsely, his voice trembling with exhaustion. "The fleet will return if we raise walls. We should scatter. Hide in the hills, in the caves. Survive, at least for a time." Rourke stood in the circle of dim light, his figure tall, shoulders squared despite the blood that matted his uniform. He stared into the shadows that pressed around them like a suffocating shroud. His voice, when it came, was low but steady. "No," he said. "We do not scatter. We do not crawl away to wait for the end. We make this world their grave. With what we have left, we'll make them remember humanity." His words did not ignite cheers, nor did they fill the survivors with sudden hope. But in the silence that followed, no one disagreed. Because in their bones, in the marrow of what it meant to be human, they knew. Survival alone was not enough. The days that followed blurred into one long trial. They scavenged food from half-buried storerooms, hunted small game in the ashen forests, and drank from rivers turned sour with soot. They buried their dead in shallow graves, each mound a quiet promise of vengeance, and always, they searched the ruins of the fleet. For when the Cathari Armada had unleashed their fury, not all of their weapons had left clean destruction. Some had misfired, some had shattered an atmosphere, some had collided with human defenses in their final desperate moments. Scattered across the plains, half-buried in molten glass, were fragments of alien warships, broken wings, smoldering engines, shards of weapons that had once burned cities to the ground. The survivors began to drag them back to camp. Piece by piece, the wreckage piled high, a twisted graveyard of alien pride. The engineers worked first, those whose hands still remembered the patterns of circuitry, those whose minds could still glimpse function in fractured design. They burned their fingers on alien alloys, cursed over symbols they did not understand, but slowly, impossibly, They began to learn. Humans had always been thieves of knowledge, borrowers of the universe. Give them scraps and they would build tools. Give them ruins and they would build weapons. The wreckage became their arsenal, yet it was not only technology that steeled them. In the long nights, when the smoke cleared enough to reveal the stars, they would gather around the fractured monument in the plaza. Some spoke of Earth, of families left behind who would never know their fate. Some wept, faces hidden in their hands, and some prayed, quiet words sent into the infinite, searching for meaning in a universe that had tried to erase them. Once, a young boy asked Commander Rourke why the aliens hated them, why they had chosen to destroy rather than speak. Rourke's answer was heavy with a grief he did not try to hide. They don't hate us, he said softly. They don't even think of us. To them we're nothing, ants beneath their boots. But that is why they will fall. Because they don't know what it means to be human. The boy said nothing, but his small hands clenched into fists. By the second month, the survivors were no longer just scavengers. They were builders of ruin, crafters of vengeance. What had once been a colony plaza was now a fortress of jagged alien metal. What had once been despair was now sharpened into resolve. And far above, in the cold silence of space, the Cathari fleet stirred again. Their commanders had forgotten Uriali. To them, it was a finished conquest. But patrol ships drifting through the system sent back strange readings, power surges from a dead world, signals carved from wreckage. At first, the Armada dismissed them. Impossible. No life remained there, but humans were alive. And the ashes of the silent fleet were about to speak. Weapons of wreckage. The sky above Uriel was a graveyard. From horizon to horizon, fragments of the Cathari Armada drifted in the upper atmosphere, their glowing scars burning faint trails across the night. Each shard of alien metal was a reminder of destruction, but also, though the Cathari did not yet understand, a signal of what was to come. Humanity had been crushed. Humanity had been left for dead. But death had always been a teacher to humans, and they were fast learners. The survivors began their war not with ships, but with silence. It was the engineers who first discovered the potential. Lieutenant Anika Solano, her hair forever dusted with ash, pried open the husk of a downed Cathari drone. Its sleek carapace was cracked by impact, its circuit still alive with faint pulses of blue light. At first glance, it was incomprehensible. Alien runes wound like veins across the inner core, shifting as if alive. The weapons array was fused, but its guidance system, miraculously, still glowed. Annika worked her fingers bloody on its edges, her mind whirling faster than her failing tools. She was not fluent in this alien logic, but she was human. She adapted. She learned. Within days, she had made it speak in fragments. A flicker of code here, a spark of power there, enough to make the impossible thinkable. We can't fight them ship to ship, she told Rourke one night, her voice sharp with conviction. But we can use their own teeth. We turn the wreckage into traps, landmines, decoys, bombs they'll never expect. They see garbage. We see daggers. Rourke looked at her, at the dark circles beneath her eyes, at the hands blackened by burns, and he nodded. Then we make daggers, he said. They began with the small things. Shattered drones, fallen cannons, alloy shards sharp as razors. Each fragment was studied, stripped, rewired, and reassembled into something lethal. The plaza became a workshop of vengeance. Fires burned at all hours. The clang of hammers rang across the ruins. Sparks rained in the dark. The miners, once wielders of drills and pickaxes, adapted with uncanny speed. They tore through wreckage with the same strength they once used to dig stone. Farmers learned to melt alien alloys into makeshift shells. Children too young to fight sifted through rubble for anything useful. Wires, scraps, shards of crystal that hummed faintly when touched. In less than a month, the survivors had turned the wreckage into a hidden arsenal. But weapons alone did not make war. War required a strike. Their first chance came when the Cathari returned. It was not the full fleet, but a patrol, 3 scout ships sleek as blades, descending through the atmosphere with silent contempt. They came searching for anomalies, the strange signals their long-range sensors had whispered about. To them, it was a routine inspection of a dead world. To the survivors, it was the moment everything changed. Rourke gathered them at dusk. The air was thick with smoke, the ruined plaza burning orange in the last light of the sun. 79 pairs of eyes stared at him, waiting, This is it, he said quietly. They think this world belongs to them. Tonight we remind them it doesn't. We remind them we are still here. We remind them we are human. There was no cheering. No loud cries of war. Only grim nods, clenched fists, and the silent fire of determination in their gaze. The trap was set in the Valley of Glass. When the Armada's first bombardment had struck the eastern plain, the heat had melted sand into vast sheets of jagged crystal. Now the valley gleamed like a wound in the earth, reflecting the stars in fractured brilliance. Beneath that glittering surface, the survivors had hidden their first weapon. Annika had rewired a gutted drone into a core of volatile energy. The miners had buried it beneath a thin crust of glass, covered with shards that disguised the disturbance. Wires disguised as debris led to a crude trigger. When the patrol ships glided low over the valley hunting for survivors, they saw only ruins. To them it was empty land until the ground erupted. The blast split the night. A sphere of white fire engulfed the lead scout ship, its elegant form twisting into fragments. The shockwave tore through the valley. Shards of molten glass flung skyward in a glittering storm. One ship died instantly, sheared in half. Another spun out of control, slamming into the mountainside in a roar of flame. The third ship, wounded but intact, rose sharply, its weapons lashing out blindly. Blue lances scythed across the valley, turning stone to vapor, but the survivors were already gone, scattered into the shadows, hidden among the ruins. The ship screamed upward, trailing smoke, fleeing into the dark. It would not forget. It would tell the Armada what had happened, and that was the point. That night, for the first time since the bombardment, laughter rang in the plaza. Bitter, sharp-edged, but real. The survivors shared food scraped from the bottom of their stores, their faces glowing in the firelight. They had struck back. They had killed the invincible. Do you think they'll come now? One of the miners asked Rourke, eyes shining. Rourke stared into the flames, his expression unreadable. They'll come, he said, and they'll come angry, which means we'll have more wreckage to work with. The others laughed grimly, but his words were not a joke. Above, in the silence of space, the Cathari Armada stirred. The loss of 3 scout ships was nothing to them. An inconvenience, a statistical anomaly. But anomalies demanded correction. The commanders dispatched a strike force, swift, precise, enough to scour any remnants of resistance. They still believed the colony was dead. They had not yet understood the truth. For humans were not fighting to rebuild a colony. They were not fighting for walls or soil. They were fighting for memory, for vengeance, for survival itself. And when humans fought for those things, they became something no fleet, no empire, had ever truly prepared for. They became the storm rising from ashes. That night, before the next dawn, Rourke stood alone at the edge of the ruined city. The wind carried the scent of burned stone and scorched earth. Above him the stars glittered coldly, indifferent witnesses to the war about to come. He whispered into the silence. Not a prayer. Not quite. A thought. If you're out there and watching, we'll need more than luck. Behind him, the survivors worked through the night, fashioning daggers from wreckage, turning ruin into resistance. And far above, the storm was already on its way. The Valley of Traps. The Cathari strike force fell like thunder. 5 warships, black as obsidian, pierced the atmosphere with trails of fire. Their arrival shook the mountains, turned rivers into steaming scars, and filled the night with the shriek of engines not meant for silence. To the survivors of Uriale, the sky was once again aflame, yet this time, there was no despair in their eyes. They were ready. Commander Elias Rourke stood at the edge of the shattered valley, wind clawing at his cloak of ash-stained fabric. Below him, the Valley of Glass shimmered faintly, its crystalline surface fractured into jagged shards. But beneath those shards, hidden carefully in caverns and pits, lay the survivors' true strength, the weapons born of wreckage, mines forged from gutted drones, cannons assembled from scavenged alien cores, crude bombs packed with minerals pulled from the colony's ruined mines, laced with unstable fragments of alien energy cells. Each device was unstable, dangerous, and unpredictable, but it was all they had, and it was enough. Behind him, the survivors waited. Their faces were thin, hollowed by hunger, eyes red from smoke and sleepless nights. But those eyes burned. Not with fear, with fire, with purpose. Rourke turned to them, his voice steady. They think we are broken, he said. They think we are ghosts clinging to rubble. Tonight we show them what it means to fight humans on their own ground. We don't match them ship for ship. We turn this valley into their grave. Hold your nerve. Strike when the time is right. And remember, every ship we bring down is one more weapon for us. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The silence of the survivors was sharper than any war cry. The first warship descended low, scanning beams sweeping the valley. Its hull gleamed like oil under the fractured starlight, sleek and flawless. It moved with a predator's grace, confident, unchallenged, and then the ground tore open beneath it. A mine, buried deep beneath glass, erupted. A core of stolen alien energy detonated, the blast shredding the air with a scream of light. The ship's shields flared, cracking under the strain, and its hull split along one wing. The vessel spiraled, vomiting fire, and smashed into the mountainside in an avalanche of stone. The valley roared with human triumph. The Cathari, startled, unleashed their fury. Blue lances of energy rained from the remaining ships, carving the valley open. Shards of glass turned to molten rivers. Rocks vaporized into dust. The survivors scattered like shadows, vanishing into tunnels and trenches dug into the ruins. The alien fleet fired blindly, with contempt more than caution. But the valley had been prepared for this. Hidden cannons, disguised under rubble, flared to life. Their shots were crude, their aim imperfect, but each blast carried the sting of alien fire, ripped from the wreckage of fallen drones and rebuilt by desperate hands. One cannon screamed upward, piercing the belly of a descending ship. The vessel shuddered, flames spewing from its engines before it tilted and plunged into the valley floor. The impact shook the survivors' bones, scattering dust and shards into the night. The humans pressed the attack. Rourke sprinted across the battlefield, smoke stinging his lungs, directing fighters from cover to cover. Miners hauled heavy bombs on their backs, their muscles trembling but unbroken. Engineers crouched behind shattered walls, frantically rewiring drones into makeshift explosives, their hands moving with blistered precision. Even children darted through the ruins, carrying messages, dragging supplies, never once flinching from the storm above. The Cathari ships were mighty, but they were unprepared. They had come expecting silence. Instead, they found a battlefield that breathed. From hidden tunnels, survivors ignited traps, strings of wired charges that turned falling debris into storms of shrapnel. From ridges, they triggered collapses of stone that hammered ships struggling to maneuver low in the valley. Every strike was small compared to the Armada's firepower, yet each tore at the aliens' pride. Each carved a wound into their certainty. Humanity fought not with strength, but with defiance sharpened into cunning. The third ship fell when a group of miners dragged a bomb directly beneath its hovering shadow. With no way to trigger it remotely, one of them, a broad-shouldered man named Kale, stayed behind to light the core. His friends shouted, tried to drag him away, but he shoved them onward, smiling through cracked lips. "Go," he said simply. "Tell them I made it count." The blast swallowed him whole, a white flare that shattered the ship above him into a rain of molten shards. His name was carved into memory that night, a reminder that humans fought with more than weapons. They fought with sacrifice. By dawn, the valley was a graveyard of fire. 3 ships lay broken, their carcasses twisted into the glass. A fourth, crippled and smoking, limped into the sky, its engines shrieking. Only one escaped whole, rising fast toward the stars, fleeing with the message its commanders had not expected to hear. Humans lived. Humans fought. Humans killed. When silence finally fell, it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of awe, of breathless survival. The survivors gathered in the ruined plaza once more, their bodies battered, their wounds aching, but their eyes alight with something stronger than victory. Hope. That night, Annika sat apart from the others, her hands trembling as she cleaned a shard of alien metal. Rourke approached quietly, sitting beside her in the dust. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected, her voice flat. Her hands shook harder, the shard cutting her skin. Blood streaked her fingers, but she did not seem to notice. "But they'll send more, bigger, stronger. This was just a scout force. The Armada won't make the same mistake twice." Rourke looked out at the shattered valley, at the fires still smoldering, at the new wreckage waiting to be scavenged. "Then we'll be ready again," he said softly. "That's what they don't understand. They think war is about numbers, about ships. They don't know war is about will. And ours isn't broken. She turned to him, her face streaked with dirt and tears. And if will isn't enough? Rourke's gaze lifted to the stars, to the endless cold above them. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. Then maybe someone out there wants us to win. Above, the surviving ship streaked into orbit, carrying news to the Armada. To the Cathari commanders, it was unthinkable. Primitives rising from rubble to strike at their warships. Impossible and yet undeniable. And for the first time in generations, the Cathari felt something they had not felt in a war for centuries. Fear. Whispers of fear. The Cathari Armada had not known fear in centuries. Their empire stretched across the spiral arms, built on conquest and certainty. They were not a species that doubted. Their fleets did not retreat. Their commanders did not ask questions. But when the surviving scout ship limped into orbit, its hull torn open, its crew half mad with shock, whispers began to ripple through the flagship's command halls. The humans were alive. Admiral Vakar stood before the great holomap of Uriale, his crest of silver scales rising and falling as he listened to the fractured reports. He was vast by human standards, his six-limbed frame armored in ceremonial plates that gleamed like obsidian. His voice, when it came, was deep and measured. "Explain it to me again." The scout captain, still trembling from the memory of fire, bowed low. His mandibles clicked nervously. "We descended to verify eradication. The surface readings, anomalies. We found resistance, crude, primitive but effective. They used our wreckage, traps, explosives. They brought down 3 ships." The words hung in the air, heavy as a storm. The gathered officers hissed in disbelief. A few laughed, a harsh metallic sound, impossible, absurd. Humans were frail things, soft-skinned and slow. They had no ships left, no weapons, no chance. Admiral Vakar did not laugh. His eyes, black and unblinking, studied the holomap with a stillness that unsettled the chamber. 3 ships, he repeated quietly. "Destroyed by a colony already marked dead." The captain lowered his head. "Yes, my lord, they are." Resourceful, the word carried weight. Resourceful, a dangerous word. A word that in Cathari history was spoken only of species that endured longer than expected, that refused to kneel even when broken. Vakar's mandibles clicked once, sharply. "So be it. If humans choose to rise from ash, then we shall teach them what it means to burn completely. Dispatch a cleansing fleet, 10 warships. Scour the colony to its bedrock, and bring me proof this time. No whispers, no survivors." The officers bowed. Yet behind their rigid obedience a seed had been planted. Whispers carried from one mandible to another, spreading like cracks in a crystal. Humans had killed Cathari. The impossible had happened. On the ground, the survivors did not know of the fear they had sown. They only knew time was short. The valley smoldered with new wreckage, the twisted corpses of alien ships still glowing faintly in the night. Scavengers worked tirelessly, prying open engines, dragging power cells, harvesting every shard that could be turned to purpose. The air stank of smoke and melted alloy, but to the survivors it smelled of opportunity. Children picked through the rubble with small hands, dragging wires and scraps to the engineers. Farmers turned their barns into forges. The plaza, once a place of governance and trade, was now an armory bristling with salvaged weapons. Commander Rourke moved among them constantly, his presence a steady anchor. His voice was calm, his orders clear, his silences heavy with unspoken resolve. He did not need to shout to be heard. His determination spoke louder than fire, but even he felt the shadow of what was coming. One night Annika found him alone at the edge of the shattered monument. The stars were sharp above, their cold fire reflected in the shards of glass that carpeted the valley. "They'll return," she said simply. "They will," he answered. She crouched beside him, her hands still blackened from hours of dismantling alien cores. "Do you think we can win?" He didn't look at her. He looked at the stars. "Winning isn't what we're doing," he said softly. "We're showing them something they've never seen. We're showing them we won't break, that no matter how many times they burn us, we'll rise again. That's what frightens them. Not our weapons, us." Annika studied him quietly, then lowered her gaze. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you ever wonder why we're still alive at all? After that first bombardment, it should have killed everyone." Rourke exhaled slowly, as though weighing his answer. Finally, he said, "Every time I crawl out of rubble, every time a blast misses by inches, I don't think it's chance. Not anymore, Annika frowned. You mean God? Maybe, he said, eyes still on the stars. Or maybe just something that doesn't want us to end here. She didn't reply, but her hands tightened as though gripping something unseen. By the third week after the battle, the survivors had become something more than a remnant. They were a machine of purpose. Every pair of hands, every scrap of metal, every moment was turned toward one goal: resistance. The dead were mourned, but even in mourning they gave strength. Kale's sacrifice was carved into the monument's broken stone. Children traced his name with their fingers, whispering it like a promise. When one of the farmers collapsed from exhaustion, others carried him back to work the next day. When an engineer lost her tools, miners handed her their drills. No one asked, no one demanded. They simply gave. Because survival was no longer individual. It was collective. They were not 79 scattered souls anymore. They were humanity condensed into one will, one fire. Far above, the cleansing fleet approached. 10 ships, larger and stronger than the scouts, engines roaring like thunder as they cut through the void. They came not as hunters but as executioners. They would sweep low, unleash fire, and erase the survivors so thoroughly that not even whispers would remain. But whispers already had power. In the mess halls of the fleet, Ketheri soldiers spoke in hushed tones of the humans below. Some dismissed them as vermin with sharp teeth. Others quietly admitted unease. To rise from ash, to kill with wreckage, what kind of creatures did that? Even Admiral Vakar, silent in his command chamber, felt the echo of something old. Something his kind had not known in generations. It gnawed at the edges of his certainty. He thought of the word the scout captain had used: resourceful. The word would not leave him. On Uriel, the survivors prepared for fire. Annika finished her work on a new weapon, a railgun cobbled together from alien coils and human steel, its barrel twisted but functional. Farmers tested bombs made from fertilizer and unstable energy shards, burying them deep in the glass valley. Children learned to whistle signals through shards of pipe, their voices carrying across the battlefield when radio silence was needed. And in the plaza, Rourke gathered them all. "We know they're coming," he said, his voice firm, steady. "And they'll bring more than before. But listen to me." His eyes swept across the tired, hollow faces, burning into each one. "We've already won." Confusion flickered among them. "We've won because they remember us. Because they're afraid. And fear makes even giants stumble. Tonight we sharpen that fear. Tonight, we show them again what it means to fight humans. Not for soil, not for buildings, but for the one thing they can never take from us." His hand clenched into a fist. Our will. The survivors did not cheer. They stood in silence, their hearts pounding, their faces grim. And in that silence there was more power than in 1,000 war cries. In the cold void above, Admiral Vakar's cleansing fleet descended, and for the first time, the Cathari did not descend certain of victory. They descended with whispers of fear echoing in their minds. The harvest of wreckage, the ocean, was their grave, and yet it became their weapon. The colonists of Uriel had no ships, no fleets, no weapons of scale that could rival the alien destroyers circling in high orbit. What they had was ruin. Shattered spires and broken habitats now rested half-sunken in the sea, carried by tides, held together by stubborn girders that refused to rust. The survivors turned those ruins into something new. The night sky glowed faintly with the scars of war, burning debris drifting down like slow snow. To the aliens above, this was the aftermath of conquest. To the survivors below, it was harvest. Every fragment of alloy, every scrap of alien hull that washed ashore was gathered. Men and women who once built homes now built death. Children who once chased each other through the corridors of hydro farms now hauled fragments of alien metal, their small hands blistered but unyielding. Elira directed the effort with feverish focus. On the cliffs of Uriale, her command post was a hollowed tower, its top shorn off by plasma fire. From here she could see both sea and sky. "No resources too small," she told them. "What they left behind we will turn against them." The people obeyed, not because she was commander, but because her voice gave shape to their anger. The alien wreckage was strange. Hull plates that bled luminous fluid when cut. Conduits that pulsed faintly even after days adrift. It was alive in a way, or half alive. But the survivors had learned to take the impossible and make it theirs. Beneath the surface, Diverse tied cables to massive shards of alien armor, dragging them to shore with the help of battered winches and stubborn muscle. Engineers worked sleepless nights carving into the alien alloys with heat lances fashioned from broken tools. Sparks lit the caves where they toiled, echoing off stone walls like fireflies in the dark. "Humans shouldn't be able to touch this," whispered Anwar, an old engineer, his hands trembling as he worked on a glowing fragment of reactor plating. "This alloy heals itself. It resists every tool I know." Alira's reply was quiet, almost like prayer. "Then we'll teach it pain." And so they did. From alien hulls, they forged blades sharp enough to cut through rock. From scorched conduits, they drew energy to power makeshift weapons. They bound wreckage with steel cables and turned them into sea mines, waiting to be pulled beneath enemy patrols. But their greatest invention was something new, something born not from technology but from desperation. The children called them ghost lights, shards of alien reactor crystal, broken yet still humming, were suspended in cages of human alloy. They pulsed with eerie blue-white radiance. At first, the survivors feared them. Some whispered they carried death or madness. But then Alira had an idea. Release them on the waters at night. Hundreds of lights drifting like stars across the sea, indistinguishable from the colony's lost navigation beacons. When alien patrol craft skimmed low over the waters, hunting survivors, they were drawn to the ghost lights. They fired plasma into the sea, wasting energy on illusions. And while their weapons cracked the waves, human divers struck from below, attaching magnetic charges torn from alien debris. Ships burned. Wreckage grew. Fear spread. It was not victory yet, but it was a beginning. One night, under a sky fractured with falling embers, Elira walked the shoreline. Her boots crunched against glassy sand fused by orbital fire. Around her, the ghost lights drifted offshore, a constellation on black water. Beside her, Jalen approached, his arm bound in rough bandages, a wound he refused to rest. He had been among the first divers, swimming into alien patrols with nothing but courage and a jagged blade. "You should sleep," he said quietly. "I can't," Elira replied. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear it, the silence. When the colony fell, when thousands died at once. That silence doesn't leave me." Jalen looked at the lights on the sea. "And yet from silence you've made stars." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind carried the hiss of waves, the crack of distant shifting wreckage. Finally, Elira asked the question she had been avoiding. "Do you think they know? Do you think the enemy realizes we're fighting back?" Jalen's face was hard, but his eyes held fire. "If they don't, they will. And when they do, they'll learn fear. Because they still believe victory was the day they silenced us. They don't understand that silence doesn't end humanity. It begins something else." In orbit above Uriale, the alien fleet stirred. For weeks, their commanders dismissed the reports. Minor anomalies, equipment failures, a handful of losses attributed to faulty navigation. To them, humanity was primitive, fragile creatures with no ships, no weapons, no future. But then came the night when 3 patrol craft vanished in the span of minutes, swallowed by explosions that erupted across the waves. Sensors caught the flare of reactor shards, but no enemy vessels. The sea itself had become hostile. On the bridge of the alien dreadnought, Admiral Sirathi brooded. His kind were vast, armored, born for conquest. Their empire had consumed 100 worlds without resistance worth remembering. Yet here, in the shadow of their victory, something gnawed at the edges of certainty. He studied the sensor logs. Ghost lights drifting like stars. Explosions without signatures. Losses without explanation. "Not luck," he muttered, though his voice held no faith. "Not chance." Back on Uriel, hope began to return. It was fragile like a spark in a storm, but it burned. Survivors whispered of victories, of alien ships broken by human hands. Children laughed again, their faces lit by ghost lights. Old men and women spoke of revenge as if it were destiny. And Elira, though burdened with grief, allowed herself a single moment of belief. She stood on the cliffs, watching the sea boil with distant fire, and whispered, "We are not finished. We are not dust. We are the storm they cannot see." The wreckage of the silent fleet had become their arsenal, the ocean their battlefield. The night their ally humanity had begun its harvest. Whispers in the void, the aliens no longer laughed. At first, their commanders mocked the idea of resistance. To lose patrol craft to primitive survivors was embarrassing, but not dangerous. That illusion shattered the night the dreadnought Korath's flame burned. It was not destroyed in battle. It was humiliated. Saboteurs struck from the sea, dragging wreckage mines into its shadow. One charge tore a hole in the lower hull. Another crippled engines. A third, made from reactor shards strung with human steel, detonated deep inside, lighting the night with a blossom of fire. The dreadnought sank into Uriel's gravity well, screaming through the clouds like a wounded god. It struck the ocean and split apart, sending waves high enough to erase entire shorelines. Hundreds of alien warriors drowned, their armor dragging them into the abyss. The survivors on Uriel watched from the cliffs, soaked in salt spray, as the impossible unfolded. Their cheers rose like thunder. For the first time they believed not just in survival, but in victory. Above the broken world, the alien fleet entered silence of a different kind, the silence of fear. Admiral Zirathi paced the obsidian deck of his flagship. His carapace gleamed like onyx, but his thoughts were shadows. The Empire had fought humans before. They were stubborn, yes, but not dangerous. A lesser species, easy to scatter. Yet here, with no fleet, no empire at their back, they had torn apart a vessel that had outlived a dozen wars. He summoned his war council. Dozens of commanders gathered in the chamber, their forms tall and glimmering with biometal. Their voices rasped through the air, clicking, hissing, debating in tones both furious and anxious. Sabotage, one growled. They had help. No primitives could build such traps. Perhaps another empire meddles here, another hissed. Or, a third whispered, its eyes glinting, perhaps we underestimate the humans. The council chamber froze. To speak such words was almost treason, and yet none moved to silence it. Shirathi's mandibles flexed. He turned to the star map hovering above the table, its crimson points marking patrols, its blue lines tracing supply chains. At the edge near the wounded colony, he placed a claw on the map. They turn wreckage into weapons, he said slowly. They are not attacking with fleets, but with ideas. That is what makes them dangerous. If they can imagine new forms of war, then our superiority is less than we believe. The chamber fell quiet. Every commander felt it. A strange unease, a pressure like gravity itself had shifted. For the first time, the Empire whispered the unthinkable, fear of humanity. On the surface, Elira stood in the ruins of an old hydro farm. Around her, engineers labored to strip alien conduits for energy cells. Sparks danced in the night and the air smelled of ozone and burning salt. Reports came in of the dreadnought's fall. The survivors cheered, but Elira felt no triumph. Only wait. Every victory sharpened the enemy's gaze. Every success risked awakening the beast fully. Jalen approached, limping but grinning. His face was tired, but his eyes burned with the same unyielding fire. They know now, he said simply. Elira nodded, which means they'll come harder, smarter. She looked at the distant horizon where alien ships still glimmered faintly in orbit. We lit the fire. Now we'll see if we can survive its smoke. In the days that followed, the war shifted. The aliens sent reconnaissance teams, not careless patrols, but elite hunters bred for war. They stalked the ruins of Uriel, their armor blending into rock and shadow. Their weapons hummed with energies humans could barely comprehend. But even here in this new game, humans adapted. They lured hunters into tunnels lined with alien alloy shards, where echoes disoriented them. They used ghost lights to mislead sensors. They crafted decoys from broken drones, filling them with explosives and lured enemies close before triggering detonations. Each clash was brutal, close, and personal. Humans fought with blades carved from alien plating, with fire-hardened spears tipped in glowing shards. They struck not for glory but for survival, vanishing into shadows before enemy reinforcements arrived. The aliens called them wraiths of the deep. Hunters returned to orbit with torn armor, scars, and haunted silence. Some did not return at all. One night, as the survivors gathered in their cliffside refuge, a storm raged across the sea. Lightning split the sky, illuminating wreckage adrift like bones of a dead leviathan. The storm howled, waves hammering against the shore. And in the storm's heart, a debate arose. Anwar, the old engineer, sat with a shard of alien crystal in his hands, its glow painting his lined face. We're pushing them too far, he warned. Each victory brings greater wrath. Do you think God spares us from their weapons forever? One day they'll unleash a fire that no trick can outwit. Jalen shook his head fiercely. We've already faced their fire. It burned our homes, our families, and still we stand. That means something. Anwar's voice cracked. Or it means we are fools clinging to hope. Elira listened, silent until the storm's thunder faded for a heartbeat. Then she spoke. Maybe we are fools. But if humanity is anything, it is a species of fools who refuse to die quietly. We don't stop. We don't kneel. Even if the sky itself falls, we endure. That is what they don't understand. Her words spread through the chamber of fire in weary hearts. Some prayed. Some cursed. Some simply sat in silence, holding the hands of loved ones. But all understood. This was no longer survival alone. It was defiance. Above, in the void, Admiral Sirathi stared at the silent world below. He did not understand humans, not yet. But he felt something his kind had not felt in centuries. Uncertainty. The humans had no fleet, no empire. Yet their defiance was shaping the course of war. Sirathi had fought dozens of species, crushed empires, and burned worlds. None had made him doubt. None had made him wonder if his gods of conquest had abandoned him. He turned to the stars, to the cold abyss beyond. And though he was not human, not of earth, not of faith, a thought came unbidden like poison in his mind. What if this defiance is not chance? What if something greater protects them? On Uriel, the survivors lit the ghost lights again, sending them drifting into the storm-tossed sea. This time the lights were not merely weapons or lures. They were symbols, stars remade by human hands, burning defiantly against the dark. Children whispered that each light carried a soul of the dead, watching over them. Warriors whispered that the lights marked the path of revenge, and some, staring at the endless sky, whispered that perhaps God himself watched through them. Elira stood on the cliffs, the storm's rain soaking her hair, the ghost lights shimmering below, and she whispered into the void, "We are still here." The War of Shadows, the aliens changed the war. No longer did they descend in simple patrols. No longer did they treat Uriel as a dead world. The Empire now studied the humans with the cold patience of predators who had tasted their own blood. They deployed psych weapons, machines that bent sound and light, weaving illusions across the ruined colony. Cities appeared restored for a heartbeat, only to crumble into ash. Voices of the dead echoed through the ruins, calling survivors by name. In the night, alien broadcast whispered promises of safety. Surrender and you will be spared. Resist and all memory of you will be erased. The goal was not to kill but to break the will. To make humans doubt the very ground they walked upon, and yet, humanity did not break. In the ruins of a shattered habitat dome, Elira walked with Jalen and a small band of scouts. Around them, fragments of alien illusion shimmered. Ghost towers dissolving into sand, laughter that became screams. One of the younger scouts trembled, whispering, "I saw my mother." She called to me. Elira's jaw clenched. Her own mind had conjured faces in the phantoms, but she forced her voice steady. They use memory as a weapon. Don't let them. The dead don't call us to surrender. They call us to fight. The words spread like a torch in the dark. The scout straightened, fear replaced with grim fire. That was humanity's secret. Where the aliens saw weakness in memory, humans saw strength. Grief became fuel. Love became armor. Even loss became a weapon sharper than steel. The aliens escalated. Drones descended at night, releasing clouds of spores that carried hallucinations. Survivors woke screaming, convinced the ground beneath them was alive, that the sea itself whispered in alien tongues. Some clawed their own flesh to escape invisible insects. Others froze, trapped in dreamlike paralysis. But here too, humans found defiance. Elira ordered the ghost lights gathered in great clusters surrounding the camps. Their glow cut through the illusions, anchoring the mind. Survivors prayed around them, whispered to them, told stories beneath their light until the phantoms faded. What began as scraps of alien wreckage became symbols of hope. The aliens sought to poison memory, but humanity turned memory into shield. In orbit, Admiral Sirathi grew restless. Reports streamed in. Illusions deployed, humans not broken. Drones sent, humans resisted, casualties mounting in ambushes. His warriors, creatures of cold efficiency, could not comprehend it. They should be falling apart, hissed one commander. Their psychology is fragile. Their history is chaos. Why do they endure? Sirathi did not answer immediately. He stared at the sensor feed, ghost lights shimmering across the ocean, hundreds of them drifting in constellations. At first they thought the lights were weapons alone, but now he realized they were symbols. Symbols could not be destroyed by fire. They endure, Zirathi said slowly, because they are not fighting only with flesh. They fight with memory, with ideas. That is something our weapons cannot touch. One night the aliens struck harder. They deployed a weapon never before used on humans, a gravitic spear, a beam that bent space itself. It tore through the cliffs where the survivors sheltered, collapsing stone like paper. Dozens were buried alive. The survivors clawed with bleeding hands to dig them free, but the ground swallowed too many. For the first time since the dreadnought's fall, despair returned. Some whispered the enemy was unstoppable. Some wept openly, their hands shaking with rage and helplessness. And in that moment, Anwar, the weary old engineer, stood among them, his voice ragged but clear. "They think we fight to live," he said. "But we don't. We fight so that when we die it means something. We fight because to be human is to stand when standing is impossible. If they want to erase us, let them try. Every scar on this world is proof that we were here." The words spread through the crowd like wildfire. Even those buried in grief lifted their heads. Even children clenched their fists. The aliens had killed, yes, but they had not broken the human will. In the days that followed, humans answered with shadows of their own. They forged mirror traps from reflective alien alloy, placing them in ruined towers. When alien drones scanned the area, their signals bounced endlessly, chasing false echoes. They turned fallen ships into bait, planting explosives within. Curious alien salvage teams that approached were annihilated in fire. They spread whispers across the commnet, hacking broken alien transmitters to broadcast distorted human voices. "We are the ash. We are the storm. You will not silence us." Every strike, every deception carried more than strategy. It carried message. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was not defeated. Humanity was becoming something the aliens had never faced. A force of defiance that fought with mind as much as blade. One evening, as the sea burned with the wreckage of another patrol craft, Elira stood with Jalen on the cliffs. "Every day we fight," Jalen said quietly. "I realize something. We don't need a fleet. We don't need an empire. We already have what they fear most." Elira turned to him, exhausted but curious. "What is that?" Jalen's smile was faint but real. "Each other. That's what they don't understand. Machines fight for efficiency. Armies fight for orders. But humans fight for each other. That's why they can't win." Elira looked at him for a long moment, the ocean wind tangling her hair, and for the first time in many nights, she allowed herself to smile. Not for victory, not for revenge, but for the truth in his words. Above, Admiral Zirathi listened to intercepted human broadcasts. He heard their whispers, their defiance, their unity. He had crushed countless foes, but never one like this. For the first time, he wondered if his fleet had not destroyed a colony at all. Perhaps they had lit a fire that would spread beyond this world, beyond this war. And though his kind did not pray, he found himself staring at the stars and whispering, not to gods, not to fate, but to the silence of the void. What if humanity is not the fragile species we believed? What if they are the storm that ends us? Fire in the veins of the beast. The ocean no longer belonged to the aliens. What began as scattered ambushes had grown into something larger, something with rhythm and intent. The survivors of Uriale, farmers, builders, children turned soldiers, were no longer simply resisting. They were waging war, and now, for the first time, Elira dared to speak it, aloud. "We're not fighting to survive anymore," she said to the gathered leaders in the half-collapsed cavern they now called the Hall. The flickering glow of reactor shards lit their faces, weary but fierce. "We fight to win." The words shocked even her. For months they had spoken only of survival, of lasting one more night, one more week. But victory? Against an empire whose fleets blotted out stars. And yet, no one laughed. No one scoffed. They had seen the dreadnought fall. They had seen patrols burn. They had seen the empire bleed. Anwar, old and bitter, leaned forward. "If you speak of victory, then speak of a plan. What can we strike that wounds them enough to notice?" Elira raised her hand, tracing a scar across the map etched in the cavern wall. "Their supply lines. The beasts feed on their own lifeblood. If we poison it, they weaken. If we starve them, they fall. The plan was audacious, perhaps suicidal. The alien fleet above Uriali depended on orbital relays that connected them to their empire. Vast platforms that ferried energy, supplies, and commands. Without them, the fleet would choke, stranded in hostile orbit. Those platforms were colossal, bristling with weapons guarded by patrols. Humanity had no ships to reach them. But they had something else. The ocean's wreckage had given birth to an arsenal of sea mines and blade traps. Now the survivors turned their eyes skyward. They would build weapons to climb. From alien alloy, they forged spires, launch structures hidden beneath cliff overhangs. From reactor shards, they crafted crude but vicious engines strapped to scavenged pods. Into those pods, they packed explosives, jagged shards, everything sharp enough to wound. They called them ash arrows. They were not missiles. They were coffins of fire, built by human hands with human rage, and they were meant for the sky. The day of the strike, the survivors moved with the silence of ritual. The cliffs thundered with waves, the sky scarred with alien presence. Children carried fragments of crystal to fuel the engines. Elders whispered prayers over the pods. Warriors carved names into the metal, names of the dead, names of the lost, so that every arrow carried memory as payload. Jalen approached Elira as the final pod was prepared. His face was hard, but his voice was soft. "You know what this means. Once we fire, they'll unleash hell." "They already have," Elira replied. Her hands traced the jagged surface of the ash arrow, feeling its hum. "The difference is now we answer." Jalen nodded, then handed her a shard of crystal bound in wire. "For luck," he said. But his eyes told her he meant more than luck. He meant survival. He meant love, though neither dared name it aloud. When night fell, the survivors gathered along the cliffs. The sea glowed faintly with ghost lights, the stars above mirrored by lights below. Between them, the ash arrows stood silent, waiting for the spark. Elira raised her hand. "Tonight," she said, her voice carrying over the roar of waves, "we tell the stars we are not their prey. We tell the Empire that even ash can burn. We tell the dead that we fight in their name." She lowered her hand. Engines roared. The ash arrows screamed into the night, trailing fire across the sky. One after another, they streaked upward, tearing into the dark. Faster, brighter, fiercer than any weapon humanity had ever birthed. For a moment, it was as though Uriel itself was hurling its grief into the heavens. Above, in orbit, alien commanders watched in disbelief. Sensors flared. Dozens of human projectiles tore into the supply platforms before defenses could react. Explosions blossomed like suns, ripping through conduits, shattering docking arms, severing relay chains. Fire spread across the platforms, cargo bays bursting apart, energy coils rupturing into storms of plasma. The Empire's lifeblood spilled across the void, and in that fire, panic bloomed. Admiral Sirathi watched the destruction from his command deck. His carapace trembled, mandibles clicking in fury and disbelief. "This is not possible," he hissed. "They have no fleets, no industry, no forges. How do they—" He stopped. He knew the answer. Humans did not need fleets. They did not need industry. They had imagination, and imagination turned ruin into weapon, and worse. Imagination turned suffering into defiance. Shirathi's warriors looked to him for orders, their eyes gleaming with unease. For the first time, he did not shout commands. He stood in silence, watching the fire spread across the platforms. A thought whispered through him, unbidden, unholy. What if victory was never ours? What if conquest birthed only resistance, and resistance something greater? On the surface, survivors roared with triumph as the platforms burned. For the first time since the colony's fall, their cheers were not desperate but victorious. They had reached the sky. They had wounded the beast. But even amid celebration, Elira felt the weight settle on her shoulders. She knew what came next. The Empire would not let this stand. They would descend with fury. Jalen stood beside her, his smile fierce, his eyes never leaving the burning sky. "We just told the galaxy the truth," he said. "We are not broken. We are not finished. We are human." Elira nodded, her heart both heavy and burning. The night sky rained with fire, alien wreckage falling like meteors. To the survivors, it was more than destruction. It was proof ash could burn. The wrath of the heavens, the sky did not forgive. For 3 nights, the survivors celebrated as the supply platforms burned. watching debris rain like dying stars into the sea. They whispered of hope, of victory, of a future reclaimed. For 3 nights they dared to believe the war was theirs. On the 4th night the Empire answered. The heavens split, a fleet descended. More ships than any survivor had imagined could exist. Dreadnoughts, carriers, swarms of hunters. Their hulls gleamed with cold fire, their shadows stretching like the hands of gods across the ocean. The sea recoiled under their presence, waves shattering against cliffs as if the world itself trembled. From the caverns the survivors looked up at the armada, blotting out the stars. Silence fell among them, a silence heavy with fear. Children clutched at their mothers. Elders bowed their heads, and warriors clenched weapons that suddenly felt like twigs before a storm. Jalen whispered the thought they all carried. They came to erase us. The first strike was merciless. Columns of fire lanced from orbit, vaporizing entire ridges. The sea boiled as beams of energy carved trenches through water and stone alike. The hidden launch sites, those cliffs that had birthed the ash arrows, were scoured into ash. The survivors scattered into the caverns as mountains collapsed above them. Alira led them deeper, her voice hoarse from shouting, guiding children by hand through choking dust. In the chaos, she turned to see an elder crushed beneath a falling beam, his outstretched hand reaching for her before the rubble silenced him. She wanted to stop, to drag him free, but the tide of survivors swept her forward. His hand vanished in the dark. By dawn, 1/3 of their hidden network was gone. Hundreds of voices extinguished in a single night. In the hall, despair hung heavy. They know where we are now. Anwar rasped, his eyes hollow. There will be no escape. They will burn the planet clean. We struck them first, someone whispered bitterly. We should never have fired. We should have remained hidden. No, Jalen said, his voice cutting through. Hidden, we would have died slow. Fighting, we at least lived loud. But even as he spoke, Alira saw the tremor in his hands. He was not immune to the dread. None of them were. Alira rose, her body aching, her heart fractured, but her voice steady. They came to erase us, she said, echoing Jalen's words. Good, let them try. Every day we still breathe, every day we still fight is another day they bleed. We are not prey. We are the storm they unleashed, her words steadied some. But she knew words alone would not hold them together. The retaliation did not stop. Every day the fleet scoured the surface. They poured fire into the seas, collapsing caverns, hunting for the embers of resistance. Entire shoals of bioships patrolled the waters, sniffing for human life. And every night the survivors answered. They ambushed patrols with blade traps hidden in coral reefs. They struck down hunter ships with jury-rigged cannons powered by reactor shards. They wove illusions in the water, luring drones into crushing depths. Each skirmish cost lives. Each victory was bought with blood. A boy no older than 12 strapped himself to a mine and hurled it into the flank of a carrier, vanishing in the explosion that crippled the beast. His mother wept, but she wept with pride. A wounded soldier, too broken to walk, demanded they leave him behind with a single ash arrow. When the hunters found him, he fired into their midst, taking them with him. His scream became a battle cry echoing through the caverns. Sacrifice became their currency, and with it they purchased survival. In the midst of ruin, something shifted. The Empire had expected fear to root deep, to rot resolve, but instead, the more the survivors suffered, the fiercer they became. Each loss was not silence, but fire. Each grave became a rallying cry. Even Admiral Sirathi, watching from his command throne, felt it, a creeping dread in the marrow of his bones. Every report brought more confusion. Patrols lost, hunters destroyed, supply drained. This world should have been ash, he snarled. Yet still they burn us. His advisors begged for a purge to glass the ocean entirely. But Sirathi refused. There was something he needed to understand, though he dared not admit it. Something about these humans, something about the way they turned annihilation into defiance. He had crushed 100 worlds, broken empires, silenced rebellions. And yet, these survivors, these fragile creatures of flesh and salt, refused to kneel. What strength did they hold that no weapon could smother? One night, as the survivors licked their wounds from another bombardment, Elira stood alone at the edge of the cliffs. The sea glowed faintly with wreckage, the stars veiled by alien fire. Jalen approached, his voice quiet. How much longer can we keep this up? She did not answer. Her body screamed with exhaustion, her heart heavy with the weight of the dead, and yet deep inside a fire still burned. They can burn the skies, she said at last. They can drown the seas. But they cannot erase what we've become. Every act of defiance writes us into their fear. That is victory even if we fall. Jalen placed his hand on hers. For a moment no words passed, just the warmth of human touch, fragile but unbroken, against the vast coldness of the void above. The retaliation reached its crescendo weeks later. The fleet unleashed its full fury, a storm of fire and metal. Caverns collapsed by the dozens. Entire settlements drowned in molten rock and boiling seas. The survivors fought until their weapons broke, until their voices bled, until the ocean itself seemed to cry with them. By the time the bombardment ceased, silence fell once more. Not the silence of peace, but of exhaustion, of grief too deep for words. And yet, amid the silence, life stirred. Children emerged from hidden fissures. Warriors limped from rubble, carrying the wounded. In the darkest hour, humanity still drew breath. Elira stood among the ashes, her body broken but her spirit alight. The Empire had unleashed its wrath, its storms, its fire. And still, humanity endured. The lesson was etched into the bones of the survivors, into the stars themselves. You cannot kill what refuses to die. The ship of ghosts, the sea, had grown quiet. Too quiet. After the storm of fire, after the Empire's wrath scorched ocean and cavern alike, silence returned. But it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of survivors who refused to bow. Elira stood on a blackened cliff staring at the wreckage that had fallen days before. The sky was scarred with smoke and the waters below glimmered faintly with alien metal. Shattered hulls, fragments of drones, and there, half submerged in a reef of broken coral, a carcass far greater than the rest, a hunter craft intact enough to breathe. Jalen limped to her side, his arm bound, his body worn. "We've scavenged every shard from their dead," he said. "But this is different." Elira's eyes narrowed. "It's not wreckage," she murmured. "It's a gift into the carcass." They approached the downed craft with caution. Its hull was cracked but not dead. Strange lights flickered within, pulses like the faint heartbeat of some wounded beast. The warriors entered first, blades drawn. Inside, the ship was a labyrinth of alien design. Tunnels that pulsed faintly as though alive. Walls humming with whispers in a language no human throat could speak. The stench of burnt ichor filled the air. Alien crew lay scattered, torn by the crash, their carapaces cracked, their black blood seeping into the walls. Children clutched one another at the threshold, wide-eyed. To them, it was a ghost ship, haunted by the Empire's dead. To Elira, it was salvation wrapped in shadow. "This thing flew between the stars," she whispered, her hand pressed against a console that trembled beneath her touch. "If we can tame it, so can we." The dream of stars the survivors set upon the carcass like ants dismantling a predator. Farmers became mechanics, builders became engineers. Children carried shards and wiring with solemn reverence. Every inch of the craft was studied, mapped, dismantled, and stitched back together with human ingenuity. They tore out alien interfaces they could not command and replaced them with crude levers, crystal fuses, and rope-bound harnesses. When words failed, they learned by blood, burned hands, scorched eyes, collapsed lungs. Dozens died in the effort, consumed by the beast they sought to tame. But each death was not in vain. Each became another step toward mastery. Jalen watched with awe and fear. "We're not rebuilding a ship," he muttered. "We're building a rebellion with wings." Elira's gaze burned like the reactor crystals they fed into the vessel's heart. "If we stay here, we die. If we take this ship, we carry our fire to the stars. Let them see us. Let them fear us everywhere." The first awakening. The day came when the survivors gathered on the cliffs to witness the impossible. The craft lay cradled in the shallows, patched with steel, lashed with cables, humming with life stolen from a dozen reactor shards. Its hull gleamed with scars and human markings, names carved into its sides, prayers etched in ash, handprints smeared across its skin like war paint. Children perched on rocks, eyes wide. Elders stood with trembling canes. Warriors tightened their grips on weapons. Every soul felt the weight of the moment. Elira climbed into the command hollow, her hand steady despite the storm in her chest. Jalen stood at her side, blood still fresh in his bandages. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she answered. Then she pulled the lever. The beast roared. Engines screamed, water churned into towers, the very ocean recoiling from the sudden fury. The hull shuddered, threatening to tear itself apart, but it held. Slowly, impossibly, the ship lifted from the sea, droplets cascading in shining arcs. The survivors erupted in cries, some in awe, some in terror, but all in belief. For the first time since the colony's fall, their eyes did not look down into ruin. They looked up. The ghost in the sky the Empire noticed. From orbit, Admiral Sirathi received the impossible report. Human craft detected, leaving atmosphere. He had laughed at first, a harsh, rattling sound, but when the image appeared before him, a stolen hunter rising on crippled wings, scarred yet alive, his laughter died. "They dare," he whispered. His mandibles twitched with fury, but beneath it, unease. If the humans could master one ship, they could master more, and if they could leave Urieli, the infection of resistance would spread. Already whispers of human defiance had reached other systems. Already the story of ash that burns was being spoken in places his empire could not silence. He slammed a clawed fist against his throne. Destroy them now. Baptism of fire. The stolen ship soared higher, its engines screaming in agony. Patrols closed in. Alien hunters diving with claws of plasma. The survivors inside the beast strapped themselves to harnesses. Manned cannons cobbled from reactor shards and human steel. The first volley shook the sky. Plasma tore across their hull, searing metal, but the humans fired back. Shards of burning crystal ripped through alien wings, sending one hunter spiraling into the sea. Jalen manned a cannon, his broken body braced against recoil. "We are not prey," he bellowed as his shot split another ship apart. Elira fought the controls, the ship writhing like a beast that hated its new masters. But she bent it with will and fire. "Climb," she whispered. "Climb." The craft roared higher, leaving the sea behind, breaking through clouds torn by plasma fire. Ahead lay the stars, vast and cold but no longer unreachable. The threshold. The alien fleet loomed above, a wall of death waiting. The survivors inside the ship knew they could not win. Their weapons were few, their shields fragile. But it was not about victory. It was about proof. Proof that humans could rise. Proof that they could steal the stars themselves from the jaws of gods. As beams lanced toward them, Elira gritted her teeth and pushed the ship harder. Every alarm screamed. Panels burst in sparks. Blood trickled from her ears. Still, she forced the beast upward, higher, faster, until the black of space yawned before them. For one breathless heartbeat, the survivors floated beyond the grasp of Uriele's sky. They looked upon the endless void, upon the stars that had once watched in indifference and knew they belonged here. Then the fleet struck. The ship screamed as fire tore through its hull. Survivors were hurled against walls, consoles shattered, and the beast began to fall. But even as they plunged, even as fire consumed the sky around them, Elira's voice rang out, fierce, unyielding. "Remember this moment. We touched the stars. No empire can take that from us." The fall and the flame. The ship of ghosts crashed back into the ocean, fire trailing like a comet. Waves swallowed it whole, steam boiling as alien fleets circled above. Silence followed. But the survivors who crawled from the wreck did not weep. They had seen the stars. They had proven it was possible. And proof, Elira knew, was more dangerous than any fleet. For the first time, humanity was not bound to a single world. They had touched the heavens, and the heavens would never forget it. The ashes that burned forever. The Empire believed the fire had been drowned. After the ghost ship fell from the heavens, after the seas boiled and silence returned, Admiral Sirathi declared victory. To him, humanity was extinguished at last. Ashes scattered into the waves, a nuisance erased. But in the caverns of Uriel, survivors still drew breath. Broken, bloodied, fewer than they had ever been, but alive. And alive was enough. The last stand Elira stood in the hall, now half collapsed, walls cracked and glowing with faint shards of reactor crystal. Only a few hundred remained. Children clung to mothers. Warriors leaned on broken weapons. Jalen, bandaged and scarred, struggled to stand beside her. His body was nearly finished, but his eyes still burned. "They will return," he rasped. "They won't stop until nothing breathes." Elira nodded. She knew. The Empire had not learned to fear yet, not enough. They needed one final lesson, carved in fire deep enough to outlast the stars. "We cannot win," she said. Her voice did not tremble. "But we can choose how we end, and in that choice we can make them fear us forever." The Gambit, the wreck of the ghost ship, lay beneath the sea, half buried in coral and bone. Its heart, the alien reactor, still pulsed, though weak, like an ember refusing to die. Elira's plan was madness: to feed the reactor every shard, every fragment of stolen power they had left, to overload it until it became a star born from the ocean's womb. The blast would not merely shatter ships. It would scar the fleet. It would scar memory. Jalen stared at her when she first spoke it. "That will kill us all." "Yes," she said simply. "But it will kill them too. And more than that. It will tell the galaxy what humans are. That even in death we burn. The choice they gave the survivors a choice. Stay hidden, flee into caverns, cling to days that would end in silence. Or join the fire. Not one chose silence. Mothers carried children to the wreck. Elders who could no longer walk were carried on shoulders. Every shard of crystal, every fragment of reactor light was dragged into the belly of the beast. The survivors carved their names into the walls of the ship. Every handprint, a vow. They sang, not songs of sorrow, but fierce chants that shook the water itself. When all was ready, Elira stood before them. "We die tonight," she said. "But we die as the stars will remember us. Not as prey, not as victims, but as fire. Let the Empire drown in the ashes of our defiance." The fire awakens, the reactor roared. Fed with every shard, every fragment, it blazed with unnatural light. The ship trembled, its broken wings glowing like molten bone. The ocean boiled around it, turning black with steam. Above, the fleet descended again, claws of fire stretching toward the surface. Jalen staggered to Elira's side. His breath rattled, his body failing. He gripped her hand, and for a moment they were not leaders or warriors, just two souls facing the end together. "Do you regret it?" he whispered. Elira's eyes never left the burning reactor. "No, I regret nothing." The ascension, the ship rose, slowly, violently torn apart as it climbed. Survivors sang within, their voices woven with screams, prayers, laughter, tears. The ocean erupted in steam as the vessel clawed free of the waves. Alien hunters swarmed, firing beams that tore chunks of flesh from the beast. But the ship did not fall. It climbed higher and higher, carried not by engines but by will. Admiral Zerathi watched from his throne, disbelief shattering his composure. "Impossible," he hissed. "They cannot rise again." Not after, but they did. The ghost ship, glowing brighter than any star, rose into the fleet itself. The star of ashes at its heart. The reactor split open. Light poured out, searing, holy in its fury. Elira closed her eyes, feeling the heat crawl into her bones, into her breath. She thought of the colony that once was, of the fields, of children's laughter before the fall. She thought of Jalen's hand. The heavens, a wound carved into night itself. For worlds light years away, new stars appeared, etched with humanity's defiance. The legend. No human voice survived the blast. No body endured. Uriel itself wept, its seas boiling, its cliffs crumbling into silence once more. And yet the story did not die. Alien survivors, crew who fled, scouts who watched from afar, carried it. Whispers spread to outposts, to colonies, to slaves beneath alien chains. They spoke of a people who rose from ruin, who turned wreckage into weapons, who touched the stars with their bare hands. They spoke of humans who burned themselves alive to wound an empire, and in every whisper, in every retelling, the same truth echoed. You cannot kill what refuses to die. The fear of God's Admiral Zerathi survived, though scarred, his flagship half destroyed. His name was never spoken again with reverence, only with shame, for he had faced prey and found gods in their place. The empire would rebuild, but it would never forget. Fear of humans became seed and shadow, growing in the hearts of conquerors. Every new rebellion, every whisper of resistance, carried the name of Uriale. Ashes of the silent fleet burned brighter than stars. The immortality of fire, in the void of space. The scar still shines, a nebula of ash and fire, a graveyard-turned beacon. Navigators call it the burning veil. To the Empire it is a warning, to the oppressed it is hope, and to the stars themselves it is proof. Humanity, fragile and fleeting, had written itself into eternity, not with fleets, not with empires, but with fire.